Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So here I want to cover my Paladin healer build for module 28. We have a few new gear pieces we can use. Now this build will get you 90% in all of your healing stats. Power, crit strike, crit severity and outgoing healing. This however is when you're within a full party, but not dependent on anybody else. Not dependent on anything they could give you. So this build is an ideal foundation to first maximize your outgoing healing, and from there you can make the decision to sacrifice some bonuses to provide extra team support. We'll cover that later on in the video in group optimization. But again, this gets you all the important healing stats maxed out, even with a ton of forte, without say relying on Rapture or Paladin Crit Aura or any of that. You're just by yourself and you can be with any random player, doesn't matter what they use, and you can have all of these maxed out stats with up to 40% total healing boost on top. Now, like my recent builds, I have a document which is going to showcase and cover everything that you need to put together this build for yourself. And yes, the final section again is group optimization, where you want to switch things out to provide buffs to your team to say improve their damage, but yes, add a little bit of a sacrifice to your own effectiveness. But let's jump into the build. There will be timestamps on the play bar below where you can skip to any section you're most interested in. So the first thing we're going to cover is powers, how to actually play, what to actually use. For the at-wills, you're going to just use Divine Fulmination to deal a bit of damage from a distance. You have range 80 feet, and otherwise Cure Wounds should top somebody up. If there's only one person who's a bit lower hit points than everybody else, use this to top them up. You will want to use say a Divine Shelter first, and then use the Cure Wounds, because you'll take then advantage of sheltered healing to get that enhanced magnitude so that it heals for an awful lot more. Now your encounter powers, there's quite a few effective ones you can use depending on the situation. Divine Shelter plus Sacred Weapon plus Circle of Divinity is your core base setup that you can use everywhere if you wish, but you can again switch things depending on the content. Divine Shelter is your large area of effect heal, radius 80 feet, and gives a decent solid shield on people. It's going to be like 30% of their hit points or so. Ignore that those guys are getting fully shielded, they're not exactly geared at all. You will use this to just make sure everybody has that shield and everybody's healed. And then, yeah, they would just be Sacred Weapon for Divinity regen. You'll also get some damage resistance, and Circle of Divinity also for the regen while you stand in it. And if you're a newer player and don't have max stats yet, then this will also provide a 15% outgoing healing boost to you. If you can't afford to stand in this area because your content requires you to move a lot, perhaps switch to Bond of Virtue for some added healing. And otherwise, if you're in fights where there are lots of enemies that you can stun, you can use Burning Light and Banishment. Don't use them like together, just alternate them. Use Banishment, wait 6 seconds till they're free, and then use Burning Light. So otherwise you're just wasting that stun, and you can basically stun enemies for a full 9 seconds, which is pretty nuts, and that's definitely something you've got to your advantage. Also being able to use Banishment from quite a far distance with a radius. You can basically stun the entire group of enemies before your team even gets there. And there is Divine Touch that you can sometimes use instead of say Divine Shelter, but I would only do so if your teammates are going to be spread apart. It's only going to heal players, so not like companions, and it's split between the amount of players you heal. And you can see on me here, it is like nearly fully shielding me just with this one encounter power alone. That's pretty nuts. It's shielding me for over 1 million. But again, it's split between the amount of players you heal. So if there's 2 of us in the area, you can see we get like half the size shield. So again, it's only good when people are spread out a lot. I like to use it in say dragon hunts because people are usually very spread there. We move to the daily powers, and I generally like to just have Lay on Hands in reserve, have your daily power full, and just wait for that. If people are grouped up and taking a lot of heavy damage over time, you can use Sanctuary and otherwise you could just use Shield of Faith for a little bit of a buff. For your mechanics here, be aware that you have this shift ability, which is a block. You can absorb incoming damage up to 40% of your maximum hit points, and it'll just also give you control immunity. You just need to make sure you face the center of the control ability. So if it's a red area that might knock you, you have to look towards the red area into the center of it in order to gain that control immunity. Unfortunately, they changed it to be like that. It will no longer give you 360 control immunity. Your tab ability, which is your channel of divinity, you can tap it to put this mark above somebody's head. And this mark will allow you then to cast your Hand of Divinity, which is a massive heal with a massive shield, and it will always go to the target with those wings. So you can then channel it, and the longer you channel it, the more cost it will be, but also the higher the heal will be along with the shield. So just on myself, we can put the wings there, and you can see this is going to give us over our maximum hit points of shield, which is nuts. That's over 1.26 million hit points extra in shield. And all your shields will last a total of 20 seconds before they expire. And just be aware, you cannot replace your own shields with a smaller one. So if somebody has a fat shield, you're gonna have to wait till that gets either reduced or it falls off before you can place another one. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. For the class features, I generally go with Composure and Aura of Restoration. You can sacrifice a bit of healing to give your team a bit of offensive stats of Critical Strike with this. Alternatively, there's Aura of Protection, giving them extra defense. The rest of them I don't find very useful. For the feats, generally the best composition is this. Be aware of Prayer of Opportunity, and if you find yourself just not taking advantage of it, then don't be afraid to just go Battle Focus. Prayer of Opportunity, basically when you heal people, you have a chance for that to trigger. We get a dotted outline in our Channel of Divinity, and we have, I believe, 12 seconds before we can cast this for free. Make sure you're channeling before the 12 seconds is over, because that can just drop off even while you're channeling, which is unfortunate. And then it'll just consume the cost of up to 140 divinity. However, I do recommend checking out gameplay of people running certain content that you want to run, and you can also check out what powers they're using to heal their team. There are certain situations where you want to time your abilities accordingly. You want to space out your heals because they all cost this divinity and you only have so much of that. You can't just keep spamming or you will run out and then you'll have nothing to heal people with. So it's a balance between how much damage your team take. Are they taking unnecessary damage? And then how much should you then actually heal them, and balance that as well with, say, their healing potions, because keep in mind they do have them, healing potions and health stones, if they really need to. Don't run out of divinity when you're going to need it for, say, a heal check. So let's move on to our stats. So as a paladin healer, your main stats you want to focus on is power, outgoing healing, then critical severity, and then critical strike. You will also want to go with item level to get base damage to also improve your healing, but that's outside of scaled content. When you are scaled, your damage, this modifier, is just set to a certain value. However, there are also bonuses like the detector set, like your divine aegis, like your weapons. They're all going to add total healing, and this is going to add to this outgoing healing stat, which we do get to 90% with, say, reinvigorate on this build, but they won't show. Like, you might slot and unslot your divine aegis and not notice gaining that 9% at all, and that is correct. You won't see it. It will add, but it will be hidden, and it can go over the 90% cap, unlike the bonuses which are shown. They cannot go over 90%. So for example, I was to add the golden bullet here. It would not allow me to get to 97.5%. It would just max out at 90% and you would gain no further bonus. You also have this Opal Abyssal Loop Ring, which is going to increase your multi-target heals by 7%. It does work. You just have to heal 3 or more players in order for it to actually affect your healing power. So this build has an absolute ton of those total healing bonuses, which you will not see adding to your stat, but will increase your amount you heal for. You will also want to be in a party of like 5 people to get Graceful Harmony maxed out, and also Critical Harmony. And that gives you the 12% outgoing healing for being in that party, and then just casting some heals will give us the Reinvigorate. That's this bonus here, which will max that out. And then the Detector set, when we cast heals, we'll get extra Forte there, and also the total healing. And in order to keep the Detector set always active is to cast an encounter power every 10 seconds. However, it does not check if you fully cast the encounter power. What you can do is just go to cast it and then press block and immediately cancel casting it. You can do that for all of your encounter powers, and that will give you a stack of this Astral Absorption, allowing you to keep refreshing that back up to 10 seconds without actually casting an encounter power. Very useful with your, say, Divine Shelter, so that you don't actually have to use any heal resource. But let's move on to our race and ability scores. So my race here is Aasimar. That's going to give us a boost to our own healing stats, but it's also going to give a boost to everybody's maximum hit points when they're nearby. Alternative races to use are like the Wood Elf for the critical strike, but then to assist your team in dealing damage, and it's your call if you want to make that decision, is the Drow or the Renegade Drow. They will both have an effect which will allow you to reduce the enemy's defense, allowing your team to deal more damage against them. Very useful again within min-max endgame content. For my ability scores, we're going Wisdom and Charisma with a little bit of Dexterity. From there we jump to the gear we're using, and you can see that's all here. We've got the headpiece from Master Temple of the Spider with the Divinity Regen, and yeah, you can see all of it here. And in my document linked below in the video description, you can also see all the gear pieces and where each one of them is coming from. Be aware of alternatives you can get. Say if you're newer to the game and still upgrading your character, don't have access to all the content, there's always alternatives you can use. Just focus on things that are going to give you boost to these stats that are important for your healing. Again, check back on the stat section. With regards to the modifications, we can see we have a critical strike here, a maximum hit points, a critical severity, and a critical strike. And then on the neck, waist, and rings, we just have awareness. Now the hit points on the armor piece here is just there so that we're not maxing out these ratings and putting them in the red. Now we jump to our enchantments. Keep in mind, only the offense ones really matter, along with the utility one. The defensive ones, you can just have spare different ones that you might use on this character or other characters, or even on your tank. It's not as important, but if you wanted to min-max, you'd probably just have all garnets in defense. For the overloads, I generally go with a Devil's Precision for the crit strike, and like a Corrupt Black Ice just to give you the action point regen. You can use any of the corrupt overloads, they'll give you that too. I haven't found it very useful to say use a White Dragon Glyph. It heals for like next to nothing, and otherwise don't be afraid to use extra survivability if you think you need that. Combat enchantment, definitely the Divine Aegis, giving that total of 9% outgoing healing. The shield effect is a little bit pointless. It doesn't really do anything, it shields for nothing. It does stack on top of your own shields, so if they ever fix it, that still won't be a problem for you at all. It'll just be extra. And bonus enchantment, you go with movement speed, depending on the content, or you could go recharge speed to maximize the cooldowns on these encounters to cast them a bit more, so you get more divinity regen. For the artifacts, we got Zealot's Blast Scepter. It's a great as primary as well for the debuff. The Spelljammer one for our set, also good as primary for the debuff. We do have the Tiamat's Arcane Globe. This is definitely not important at all. I have it here to min-max my stats so we can get a teeny bit more forte, so I can maximize my critical strike to 90% after recast our encounter powers and get our detector set stacks. you can see then we get the nice green 90%. Without that little bit of forte from this artifact, we wouldn't get that. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about it too much if you're just a regular player. Run any of the high 1500 item level artifacts instead. And we just have the scintillating symbol of order, again just for its stats, but also the stamina regen is nice and we don't need any more offensive ratings there. Now we go to our companions, and here you want to use a summoned companion which is going to support your team. So like Portobello da Vinci, but then there are ones like Dreads giving the 3% extra damage to your team, the Tutor with the combat advantage, the Black Death Scorpion to make your enemy grant combat advantage, and Spine Devil for its debuff. And there are many others as well, which might give your team even a survivability buff. But I would recommend running Portobello if nobody else in your team is, because this will also give you a little bit of power, which will help yourself to max that stat. You can, of course, just use the Forger's box, and that will get you the 3% as well. We have then Reinvigorate on this setup again to maximize our outgoing healing, but there's no problem to switch like a power companion over to the Golden Bullet or the Pink Yeti to max that out, and then just have a support one here and run with the Tamed Raptor, and that way you get all the power you need there too. So then we have Drizzt here for crit strike, crit severity, Baby Deep Crow power, the Divine Judgment from like Zariel, Zordiel. There's plenty of other ones which also just give crit strike and crit severity, the Dog for power and crit severity, and then the Compy for the power. From there we jump to our mounts. Here in our current tab we want a combat power to support the team, so ideally one of the top 4 here, as long as nobody else in your group is using it. And then for the auras you want like Mystic Aura, Pack Tactics, or Runic Aura, again depending on what teammates in your group are also using. Don't use the same one unless it's say Pack Tactics. And then for our stable we're using this. So we have a bunch of Brutality, Rhythm, and Dominance insignias, and that is it. Now you can go ahead and use Aggression insignias, and then go and have some more power enchantments here. This allows us to get, say, as much forte as possible, and then also having the stats we need to max everything. With the insignia bonuses, we have 2 Mender's Covenant, and then 2 Survivalist Expertise, and then a Shepherd's Devotion. You can definitely ditch Survivalist Expertise when running in content where you might die a lot, because this will increase the amount of hit points you lose every time you die. Fortunately for you as a healer, these revived sicknesses do not affect your healing at all. So you can die a few times and be fine, unlike a damage dealer who might use this and just lose damage every time they die. And this is only worsening that effect, so it ends up being kind of a no-go. But for you, it's quite a decent boost having like 2 of them. That's 7,500 forte. And then, yeah, that just increases your stats that you might get from it, but also your like divinity regen. But again, don't be afraid to switch that over to like more Shepherd's Devotions, even Magistrate's Patience, or Tactician's Precision. Now for the colors, the only real important ones to have is the outgoing healing and the critical severity. Then we jump to our boons. So in the campaign tab, we just have all the power, the crit strike, and the crit severity. We do take some defense and awareness, get the movement speed, and then we'll go with the recharge speed, action point gain, outgoing healing, forte, and then get the blessed boons for yourself as well. From there you can go like more hit points, more defensive stats. You can get the lingering potion boons as well, and just run with potions instead of health stones and you'll be fine. And then going to the guild boons, we've got the crit strike, revive sickness, defense. And so finally we jump to our consumables and belt items. So this build goes ahead and use squash soup, flask of potencies, Zurek, this is guild food, Wildstorm elixir, and then for the belt items we have a Hellstone, Wondrous Dragon for the action point gain, not a priority at all to get this one, and then the Awakened Forger's box, you may as well pick it up, 3% free power. And that is ultimately the entirety of the build. However, you want to go to group optimization and sacrifice certain things depending on the content you're in and what group you're in order to boost the team's effectiveness, because you can do so by quite a lot. Like, yes, you have all these stats at 90%, so your healing's great. You've got all this over healing. Like, if you're in wild space, you get a whopping 5% plus 12% when against one enemy, 17% total healing just from these weapons, plus another 7% from the detector set, another 7% from this opal ring to your multi-target heals, and another 9% from the divine aegis. That's 40% total outgoing healing bonus. So when you're already at 90%, you're basically adding 40% to that again, and you're at 130% effective outgoing healing, which is nuts. Like, that's overkill on total healing. So you can totally switch some of those out and support your team with, say, damage. Now, I cover all of the steps in the group optimization section of my document, but let's go through them with you here. You only need to adjust this build a little bit. You can switch out your ring over to the Illustra's Grace, giving that debuff, and you can trigger this by casting your Divine Fulmination. It's considered a multi-target attack. Then your left ring, switch that over to the Galactic Loop. This will give you the ratings you will need for this switch. You'll switch your neck and waist over to the Vistani set, along with the Tiamat Arty over to the Taroka deck, and that gives you the ability to cause your target to take increased damage, which will be at the same time whenever attacking anybody with Divine Fulmination as what you do with the Grace Ring. So you increase, the amount of damage your team will deal against that one target by, as you can see here, 5% from Vistani and like another nearly 5% from the Grace Ring with the debuff effect from that. So yeah, nearly 10% increased damage to the target, which is great. And then with enchantments, we just need to switch over to using 2 Jades and also 2 Cobalts, and then switch your Garnet in utility over to a Jade for a little bit of outgoing healing. And then you go to companions and you switch the Compy over to like the Golden Bullet or the Pink Yeti, and you switch the Baby Deep Crow over to the Tamed Velociraptor. And then you can also switch Reinvigorate over to like Armor Break, Dulled Senses, Slowed Reactions, Vulnerability, even Advantage Nullification or Weapon Break, and that'll support the team even further. And now you can see our stats looking very solid. Power maxed out, Crit Strike maxed out, Crit Severity maxed out, and outgoing healing maxed out. And that's with all of this. All you lost was your multi-target heal bonus ring and the detector set. So you didn't lose that much, and you gained a lot of team support. You can now provide your team with the power for the Velociraptor. You also get all that in return, allowing you to use the Vistani set to give them the debuff there, the Grace Ring for that debuff, and then also like Armor Break for that debuff, providing your team, nearly like 15% extra damage against the target. I will add in here the enchantment switches because, you did need to go and use 2 Jades and 2 Cobalts instead of what you had was like 3 Garnets and 1 Cobalt. Ultimately, that is the entirety of the build. You have a lot of ability to support the team by switching things up, sacrificing a bit of healing, but this overall build with the maximum like heals and shields with all of that over healing should help you to get a baseline to be comfortable with the amount of healing you can do, and then from there slowly but surely figure out what works for you in terms of sacrificing healing for team support. With a Raptor group, it definitely frees you up a good bit to get more extra stats to be able to fit even more debuffs. Without a Raptor group, it can be a bit harder and you will be a bit more limited, but it's still possible if, say, you sacrificed a bit of your regeneration via, say, these boots or this helmet, or even, say, these arms. You might not find you need those. Depends entirely on the group, especially if you're running with newer players. They'll take an awful lot more damage, and so you might need the extra healing. But that can be related to as well. If they have less damage boosts, they'll also take longer killing the enemy, which means they'll also just take more damage and it'll be even more work for you. So there is a balance there as well. But in most cases, if it's a good player, they'll still do good damage without, say, your buffs. And then with those good players, you'll find you don't need as much healing and you can switch to more damage support, causing them to even deal more damage again, causing your runs to be even faster. And that's what happens in Endgame. So hopefully all of this was insightful. A massive thank you to all of these channel members, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.